mic's not on. I'd like to call the Board of Adjustment meeting of May 12th, 2021 to order. Would you please stand and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, thank you. Can I have roll call, please?
Yes. Donald Bergen.
Here. Donna
Brock. Here. Michael Gordon.
Here.
Robin Hill.
Here.
Jim Harris.
Here. All right, now the next item on the agenda will be for the board to select a chair and a vice chair. So I'll leave that up to the board at this point.
Do we have any nominations?
Yes.
Mr. Bergen.
I would nominate Jim Harris to be the chairman. He has done a fine job with the Planning and Zoning Commission chairman, and I think he should continue here.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and we have a second, I guess, nominating myself for chairperson.
You're already in the seat.
Is there any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, let's call for the vote.
Donald Bergen.
Well, I guess we don't need it.
Yes.
Donna Brock.
Yes.
Michael Gordon.
Yes.
Robin Hill.
Yes.
And Jim Harris.
Wouldn't do me any good to say no. Yes. Okay, having been nominated as chair, are there any additions or deletions, corrections to the minutes of the last meeting?
Oh,
I'm sorry?
Vice chair as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Scratch that. I will now entertain nominations for a vice chair.
Nominate Jim Harris. I mean, no, that's you, Mr. Bergen, for vice chair. Second.
Okay, we have a nomination by Ms. Hill and a second by Ms. Bruck to appoint Mr. Bergen as vice chair. Any further discussion? Okay, let's go ahead and place our votes.
Donna Brock.
Yes.
Michael Gordon.
Yes.
Robin Hill.
Yes.
Jim Harris.
Yes.
And Mr. Bergen. Oh, did I already call you? What did I miss?
Okay. Are there any other positions we need to work on? Okay.
No.
Apologize for skipping that one. All right. Are there any additions, corrections to the minutes of the last meeting, which was held in, I believe, 2014? Hearing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion.
Motion to approve the minutes as submitted.
Okay. Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Bergen, a second by Mr. Michael to approve the minutes. Any further discussion? All right, let's call for the question.
Donald Bergen.
Yes.
Donna Brock.
Yes.
Michael Gordon.
Yes.
Robin Hill.
Yes.
And Jim Harris.
Yes. Okay, moving forward, let me just first read this little piece here. It says, this is a public hearing. The structure of the meeting will allow the staff to present an item. The board may ask staff questions, and then the applicant will have the opportunity to present. Board members may have questions for the applicant, and then I will open the discussion to the audience. We ask that if you would like to address the board, please do so, but there is a limit of one trip to the podium. One trip to the podium per topic and 3 minutes to speak. I will close the discussion and bring the item back to staff and ask for their recommendation. The board will then hear a motion, discuss, and vote. Having read that, the first item on today's agenda is item number 21-01600001. This is an appeal dated March 16th, 2021 by attorney Whitney Cunningham of the law firm Aspie Watkinson Diesel, PLLC, representing Terry and Melinda Silk, Tom and Christine Sherman, and Rich Goutreau appealing the zoning administrator's decision rate related to building permit application number 21-1352 for residential and garage addition to 2015 Eagle Lane. Legal description tract 136, block 3, lot 3, for the reasons stated in the appeal, primarily citing section 14.05.03, which is standard regulatory procedures, paragraph L, time limits and extensions, paragraph I, time limits, section 14.05.04, specific regulatory procedures, paragraph A, zoning clearance, and section 14.06.02, measurements and exceptions, paragraph C, heights, subparagraph I, building and structures. Mr. Schmaling, your presentation.
Chair, I'd like to jump in really quick. Is it working?
Yes.
Good morning. Thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to introduce to you really quickly Frank Cassidy. He's on Zoom here with us today. He is the attorney that is here to represent the board members. So any legal questions that you might have, you'll direct those to Mr. Cassidy, and he is here. We will move forward. And
Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Welcome, Mr. Cassidy.
Pleased to meet.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. The subject property is on the south side of town here in the golf course area. You can see on the area map that it is bound on one side by Palmer Drive and on the other side by Eagle Lane. It's highlighted in red. The overview of the case. The property is 2015 Eagle Lane. The zoning is RE, residential estates. The property is approximately 0.84 acres or 36,643 square feet. March of 2005, City Council approved a subdivision code modification waiving a prohibition for a residential lot to have street access onto parallel streets, ultimately to allow a lot combination of 2015 Eagle and 2010 Palmer Drive. October 2020, the property owner submitted building permit applications for an addition to 2015 Eagle Lane. January 14th, 2021, building permit number 21-1352 was issued by the Development Services Department. On January 26th, 2021, the property owner submitted an application for lot combination for 2015 Eagle Lane and 2010 Palmer Drive. On March 24th, 2021, an application for an appeal of the zoning administrator's decision filed with the city. And that is the overview. And at this point, we'll give the applicant or the appellant the opportunity to state their case.
Would the applicant appellant please approach the microphone? State your name for the record and please spell your last name.
Chairman Harris, thank you. My name is Whitney Cunningham, Cunningham. I'm an attorney with the law firm of Aspey, Watkins, and Diesel. I'm here this morning on behalf of my clients, the Silks, the Shermans, with respect to the proposed construction, actually the construction underway on behalf of their neighbor, the Blodgetts. Once I received and read the staff report that I'm sure you all have received and read, I realized there's really not a great deal of factual dispute in this case. But I do think what we have is a disagreement over how the city ordinances need to be read and interpreted. And that's what I'm going to speak to you about this morning. I've not prepared a lengthy or fancy PowerPoint, only a handful of slides, all of which contain material that you've seen in your staff report. I just wanted to highlight and discuss some of it. What's on the screen currently is a profile of the proposed construction from the Blodgetts. In this profile, this is the view, as a matter of fact, that my clients would see of this addition. The existing Blodgett home is off to the left of what we're seeing here, and the existing home is a substantial home. Most of the homes in this area are 3,500, 4,000 square feet. This addition is over 7,000 square feet of living space, plus garages and other terraces, and in all is over 18,000 square feet under roof. And when combined with the existing home, will be in excess of 20,000 square feet under roof. There are strip malls in this town that aren't as big as this home. And as I said, there are large homes around it, 4,000 square feet homes. This home will be 5 times bigger than anything around it. To me, that begs common sense, and that gave rise to concerns by my clients, our investigation, and the information that we've presented to you that I want to talk about today. Boards of adjustment play a really vital role in the state of Arizona, and we're all aware this board hasn't had an opportunity to sit in a number of years, and I appreciate your volunteer service, and I thank you for being here today. Boards of adjustment are created by our Arizona legislature, and their purpose is to review the decisions of zoning officers, because as it turns out, our government bureaucracy doesn't always get the answer correct. And although we have dedicated and hardworking development staff, folks like you, citizens, can sit in a board of adjustment, apply some common sense, and decide whether the development office has made the right decision or not, and in this way defend and protect our communities. In this case, you've been advised in the staff report by the very development office whose conduct we're here to discuss, that there are some topics that are off limits and you shouldn't even think about them today. And candidly, I'm not going to stand in between you and legal advice that you're getting from the city, but there are 2 topics that I do think are worthy of discussion. One is the concept of a zoning clearance, and the other is how building height is measured. And you received a staff report which is defensive of the decisions that were made in the development office. That makes sense. But please remember that defense, that staff report, is created by the same people whose job it is to do the things that we're here questioning today. And so it requires an independent body, such as yourselves, to give this a fresh look. If we can go to the next slide. So from the staff report, and this is why I said we don't really have factual disputes here. What your staff has reported is this: when we talk about zoning clearance, in practice, the zoning clearance process is contemporaneous with and included in the building permit application review process. No formal document called a zoning clearance is issued from the zoning administrator. If the proposed development does not comply with the city code with respect to the zoning standards, those deficiencies are noted and provided to the applicant as a red line during the building permit application review process. If there is compliance with the zoning standards, then the building permit may be issued from a zoning clearance perspective. Now, the prior picture that we were looking at, like I said, is an 18,000 square foot structure, which is 54.5 feet tall in a zone that is residential, 30-foot height limit, 1 family home per lot, and yet it was approved through a building permit. And our contention is there was no zoning clearance. If we go to the next slide, please. Zoning clearances in Lake Havasu City are required. Section 14.05.04 of the code places an obligation on the applicant, in this case on the Blodgetts, to produce a zoning clearance. A zoning clearance for a structure that is to be erected or remodeled shall be filed in conjunction with the companion building permit application. All right, that implies that there is a clearance that is on paper that is filed with an application. But the code continues on. Next slide, please. In the very same section, it remarks about the zoning officer's obligations. What the code says is the zoning administrator shall issue the zoning clearance after determining that the proposed development improvement complies with all of the applicable standards and provisions for the category of use of the zoning district of the subject lot in full compliance with the city code and this development code. All right. So your code says there's going to be a zoning clearance. The zoning officer is going to issue it. The applicant's going to file it. There's nothing about this that suggests it's merely a mental exercise. And in fact, on the very last page of the materials you were provided for this hearing, which is a table of the appeal process for various activities of Lake Havasu City, it points out that a zoning clearance is appealed to the Board of Adjustment. This is not a mental exercise. And what you'll note is that in the 100 pages of materials you received for this hearing, you don't have a page called zoning clearance. And in fact, the zoning officer admits, we don't have a piece of paper in this case called a zoning clearance. It doesn't exist. And that's our first complaint, that it's a required step in the process and it didn't happen. Why do we think that it didn't happen, in addition to the fact that there's no evidence that it happened? If you look at the consequences, I mean, in fact, frankly, if it happened, that might even be worse. Because in 2020, October of 2020, when this application was submitted, these two lots had not been combined. The city council approved their combination 15 years ago, but they had never been combined until 2021. And when this application was filed, they were not combined, which means that if there was a zoning review, the zoning officer approved an addition that encroached on the setback of this lot. Setback is one of the things in the staff report that the zoning officer specifically says he looks at. He approved an addition that went through the setback, across the property line, through the setback of the next lot, and onto the next lot. If there was a zoning review in 2020, it violated the setback rule. Okay, now, maybe the zoning officer thought, well, the city council approved these lots to be approved back in 2005, and so I'm going to think about them as really being combined, even though legally they have not been combined. Well, what if that happened? Actually, the situation is no better. In fact, it might be worse, because in that case, the zoning officer approved a second home on a residential lot, which is not permitted, and Mr. Schmeling can confirm me on that. On your permitted use tables in your code, and specifically 14.03.02, that talks about the uses in the various zones, in this zone, what is permitted is a single-family home. A single-family home. Multiple family dwellings are not permitted. Two-family dwellings are not permitted. Multifamily dwellings are not permitted. Duplexes are not permitted. One home. Now, there is permitted what's called an accessory dwelling unit. And an accessory dwelling unit is defined in the zoning code, section 14.03.03, and it says this: a maximum of one accessory dwelling unit is allowed per parcel. The use shall not alter the character of the premises as a single family residence. The use shall be a minimum of 400 square feet in area and a maximum of 1,000 square feet in area, or 50% of the living area of the primary structure, whichever is less. Okay, what we're talking about is a guest quarters, a mother-in-law quarters, that can't be larger than 1,000 square feet, right? Now, the Blodgett's edition is over 7,000 square feet. It is not an accessory dwelling unit. An accessory dwelling unit also has to be detached by a certain number of feet from the primary residence. This edition is attached to the primary residence. So what the Blodgetts are building is not a accessory dwelling unit, but it is, in fact, a second home. your code defines what it means to be a dwelling unit. Same section, 14.06.03, a dwelling unit. One or more rooms in a dwelling designed as a unit for occupancy by one family for living or sleeping purposes and having not more than one kitchen. Having not more than one kitchen. This home does not comply with that. If we go to the next slide. From the plans of this house, the floor plan shows what you see on your screen. In the bottom right, there is a double sink. There in the middle is a wet bar. In the straight up above at the top is space for a 48-inch refrigerator. Next to it is the pantry. We all recognize that layout of a kitchen with an island. The only thing that you don't see in that picture is a stove, which can be easily added. And how do we know that? Because also in this picture, in the upper left, you see plumbing for electric and gas for a washer and a dryer. Folks, that's a kitchen. And if there was any doubt that that wasn't a kitchen, take a look at the context, because the room directly next to it, to the left, is the dining room. This 7,000 square foot addition has a separate entrance, separate bedrooms, separate bathrooms, a dining room, a kitchen. It is a second home. It can be used as a second home. It can be closed off from the main residence, and it is not permitted in this zone under your code. So what does all this mean? Our contention is that a zoning clearance either didn't happen, because there's no evidence that it happened, but if it did happen, it was clearly done incorrectly. It was done incorrectly because the zoning officer either approved development across a lot line in violation of setbacks, or perhaps thinking that the lots were going to be combined, approved a second home on a single family lot. Either way, you run into a dead end. And what you wind up with is this structure, which is completely out of scale and unlike anything else in the neighborhood, which after all is what the zoning code is sort of designed to protect and defend. Our first ask in this case is going to be that the Board of Adjustment find that the zoning clearance either didn't happen or didn't happen appropriately, and that this case should be returned to the zoning officer for that activity to be done or redone. The second issue in this case has to do with height. If you can go to the next slide. Looking at this addition from Palmer Drive, this is what the neighbors are going to see. This is a neighborhood in which homes are allowed to be 30 feet tall. This home is almost twice that. It's 3 stories in height. It's 54 and a half feet tall. If any of us were to stand on the roof of that house, we would be twice as high as any other structure in the entire neighborhood. Now, there is, as I'm sure you know, there is a slope on this lot as compared to the original Blodgett home. The Palmer lot slopes down about 20 feet or so. To the people that live on Palmer, it is an upward sloping lot, right? It goes up away from them. And your code speaks to what that means. These are in your materials, but in section 140504, your code states that on upward sloping lots, the building site may not be higher than the average height of the lot, excluding setbacks and easements. So what does that mean? It means that if you're on an upward sloping lot, you can take advantage of the upward slope to a degree, to the average, and then you can go 30 feet up from there. To the folks on Palmer, this is an upward sloping lot. Now, when the lot was combined with the Blodgett's original home, the zoning officer says, no, we're going to treat this as a downward sloping lot. And we don't disagree with that. That probably makes sense. But does it really produce such a significantly different result? Because if this was an upward sloping lot, this house would have to be at least 15 feet shorter than what has been designed. If you look at it as a downward sloping lot, is the result different? Should it be different? I think common sense would tell us no. But here's what your code says. That on a downward sloping lot, could we go to the next slide? This is straight out of the staff report. Regarding the subject property, the maximum allowable building height in the RE district is 30 feet. In applying Development Code Section 140504E, the subject property is on a downward sloping lot, so subsection 3 of this section is applicable. To determine average elevation, the 4 setback corners of the lot are averaged. The average of the subject's 4 lot corners is below the base elevation, which is 100, the high point from the center line of Eagle Drive. Therefore, the maximum grade for the subject lot is 101. If the average grade is at or below 101, the property can import fill to achieve the 101 elevation to allow for positive drainage of the site back to the street. So here, the zoning officer almost gets it right, but importantly does not. Your code does not say that if you're on a downward sloping lot, you can disregard height restrictions and simply build from the bottom as tall as you can go. What the code says is that if you have a downward sloping lot, you can backfill it to create a building pad. In this case, the maximum height of a theoretical building pad would be at elevation 101. And here's where we have a disagreement for which we need the help of the Board of Adjustment. Because there isn't a building pad at elevation 101. This lot could not be backfilled 20 feet up to create that building lot. I mean, if it did, it would literally have 20-foot tall sheer retaining walls. Economically, it's not feasible. Practically, it's not feasible. But the zoning officer's decision in this case is detached from the reality on the ground. And your code speaks to average lot grades. And grade, by the way, is a defined term. And it's not theoretical. From your code, grade is defined as the ground surface immediately adjacent to the exterior base of a structure, typically used as the basis for measurement of the height of the structure. All right, so to summarize all of this, what does this mean? What the zoning officer did was say, in theory, the Blodgetts could fill the Palmer Lane lot 20 feet up to create a dirt pad on which they could then build another 30 feet tall. And therefore, he's allowing that theoretical height to become the reality of this 54-foot tall, 20,000 square foot structure. That's not what your code says. What your code says is that you have to look at the average height from grade, and that grade isn't a theoretical thing. Grade is an actual thing. It's dirt. The Blodgetts didn't backfill the lot. The Blodgetts just started building, and they're entitled to build 30 feet up from the average grade of that downward sloping lot. They would be entitled to fill that lot to some degree. They've chosen not to. But under no circumstance is this lot next to other residential lots going to have a 20-foot tall wall of dirt constructed on which additional structures would then be placed. It didn't happen. As a practical matter, it can't happen. And this is where common sense comes into play. The zoning officer made a theoretical calculation when the code says grade is actual dirt, an average is an average, and that is what determines what you can build. That didn't happen here. When there's a disconnect between the non-documented theoretical musings of the zoning officer and what's really going on in the neighborhood, that's when you get these ridiculous results. You know, my clients, the Silks, have owned and lived in their home for almost 2 decades. And the Shermans longer than that by another decade. Their family home for over 3 decades. They're not opposed to the Blodgetts building what the code legally entitles them to build, or to the community growing, or anything along those lines. But there is a confluence of errors that occurred here, beginning with the fact that it was not properly evaluated for a zoning clearance that allowed a nonsensical result. So, just to the last slide, please. I just wanted to emphasize this point because this is out of your code and it talks about how height is to be measured. Maximum height of buildings and structures not addressed in Division C2, which doesn't apply in this case, shall be measured as the vertical distance from an approved grade to an imaginary plane located the allowed number of feet above and parallel to the average lot grade. Average lot grade. Your code is grounded in reality. This grade wasn't filled, can't be filled, not anywhere to the near what the Blodgetts would need to do. They can build a significant structure, but it can't be 54.5 feet tall. And it can't be a second home. So here is our ask. Our ask of the Board of Adjustment is that you would, like I said before, return this case to the zoning officer for a zoning clearance or to redo the zoning clearance, and that you would instruct the zoning officer to abide the code's definition of grade, which is actual dirt, not theory. And that if those things are done, the zoning officer and the Blodgetts and the neighborhood will have an opportunity to adjust this proposed construction to an appropriate size in this location. The Blodgetts can finish their construction and everyone else can get on with their lives. But short of that, you're allowing this 20,000 square foot monstrosity to dominate and destroy this long-standing neighborhood. And I'll stop where I started, which is, thank you. This is why we need folks like you who can come in and just apply a little bit of common sense to the work that our important folks that work in our government are trying to do, but don't always get right. And with that, I'll answer any questions, and I appreciate your time.
Okay, we're at the table for questions by the appellant. Let me start, please. You basically stipulated that the addition is attached to the existing structure.
It is attached.
Okay, so that means it's an addition, not a second home. How do you make the leap in your presentation from addition to second home?
So a second home, according to the code, can come in many different forms. In fact, what the code says is that a second home can be above, below, next to, part of. Attachment doesn't define whether it's a second home or not. What the code wants to know is, does it have sleeping quarters? Can it be accessed? Does it have a kitchen?
So basically, excuse me for interrupting, what you're saying is you're going to regulate the amount of bedrooms, the amount of kitchen type spaces. This one obviously doesn't fully meet the bill as a kitchen. It's a wet bar area. So is that what you're saying? That there should be some sort of regulation as to the amount of living space, bedrooms, and so forth, and size?
Well, the code contains limitations on what you just discussed, Mr. Harris. And we have no desire to regulate beyond that. But if you apply those standards, they say you can only build so close to a property line, you can only build so high, you can't have 2 kitchens. And if you comply with all of those things, the Blodgetts, could add bedrooms, they could add an RV garage, they could do a lot of things. They've blown past all those limits. We don't create or seek to go past any of those limits. Those are all in the code. What I'm saying is the only way you get to what the Blodgetts are building is to disregard some of those things. And importantly, in this neighborhood, which is zoned for single-family residence, what the code says is, if you add on to your home and you create everything, you put all the ingredients in there that would be a functional second home, then that's a second home. I mean, that's right out of the definition.
Can you point to the location in the code that says you can't have a second kitchen?
Yes, sir.
I'm sorry for putting you on the spot, but there are plenty of homes in this community that have more than one kitchen.
Absolutely. So section 14.03.02 is the table of permitted uses. And it permits a single-family detached home. And it specifically excludes two-family dwellings, co-housing dwellings, multifamily dwellings. Okay, it excludes all of that.
Correct.
All right, so then what is that? Well, a dwelling unit is a defined term in the code, and that is section 14.06.03, and it's very short. It says that a dwelling unit is one or more rooms in a dwelling designed as a unit for occupancy by one family for living or sleeping purposes and having not more than one kitchen.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but you referenced a detached structure, not an attached structure, prior to your last reading.
This property is zoned for a single detached home. A second detached home would only be allowable as an accessory dwelling unit. That's that 1,000 square foot or smaller
Correct.
unit. Right. So if you basically add all of the ingredients of a second home, and most importantly, a kitchen, to your existing home, you have created an additional dwelling unit. You have created, in effect, a duplex.
And that's certainly your opinion, but I would beg to differ because that's still attached to the structure.
Sir, yeah, and Mr. Harris, I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here
Okay.
to help you, but I just do want to be clear on the record.
And I'm just trying to clarify.
Yeah, I don't think any of it's my opinion. I'm just reading directly from the code.
Thank you.
Okay.
Are there any other questions of the applicant? Anybody else? Well, thank you very much. Appreciate
Thank
your
you. Appreciate your
presentation.
time.
Now I will bring it to the city for their presentation. And that's going to be done by?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That'll be done by myself.
Mr. Schmaling.
Well, let's get to the right place here. All right. With regard to the zoning clearance, zoning administrators, which is the zoning administrator's portion of the building review process for residential construction. And I've outlined the code section there. It determines whether the proposed development complies with all of the sections of the development code. We have a process in the development services department, and we call it design review, and it serves as the function for the zoning clearance. It is where zoning staff reviews a project. There's an application for it, and in commercial applications and multifamily applications, we require an application, of course, an application fee. And then when that is complete, a notice of action is issued, and that, although it's not called the zoning clearance, it functions as the zoning clearance. The development code sections that were applicable to this review of single-family residential are bulleted here: lot coverage, setbacks, building height, and max grade determination. The zoning clearance for a building permit application 21-1352 was completed during the building review process, as opposed to going through a process outside the building review. We just apply our analysis with the set of plans that is given to the department through the building permit review. If there are comments or concerns raised, they are raised through the red line process. There's no second fee, there's no design review fee, and therefore there is no formal notice of action issued. When that zoning clearance for this particular building permit was completed, it met all of the, in our opinion, met all the development code standards. No formal document was released called a zoning clearance, but the approval of the building permit includes it meets all of the development standards, and I'm going to walk you through the analysis that we did as part of that review. So we'll start with the lot coverage. In the table for 0401, you can see here in the black circle, the maximum lot coverage in that district in RE is 50%. So we simply took the square footage of the lot, which was over 36,000 square feet, the existing footprint of the existing home, the proposed footprint of the addition, added the two together, did the simple math, 39.7%, met the 50% required. Then we went on to setbacks. This is the site plan that accompanied the full set of building plans. This, for reference, this is the Eagle Lane side of the property. This is the Palmer Drive side of the property. You can see here the structure actually moves away from the property line. Here at the shortest point on this side, it's 10 foot 2 inches, which the minimum side setback. Let me go back one slide quick. Whoop, wrong way. Let me go back one slide. The setbacks, as you see here in the red circle, the minimum front setback, which is not applicable here because we're not dealing with the front that's already existing. The side setback here is 10. The rear setback here is 20. And the reason that we have this highlighted is because subsection 2 suggests that garages, carports that face a right-of-way must be 25-foot setback. So let's go back to that. Let's go back to that site plan. You see here, indicated in the red circle, the 25-foot setback. The proposed garage, because it fronts on a right-of-way, Palmer Drive in this case, it is set back at the 25-foot mark, so it meets that setback. And then once again, on the, let's call it the south side of the property here, the 10-foot setback line is indicated, and the house, the proposed addition, is not, it meets that standard. Now we'll go to grade. The maximum grade assigned was assigned at a 101 based on the center line of Eagle Lane. The height of the building on a downward sloping lot, that's the applicable code section. Lots with a major portion of the lot grade lying below the base elevation may be filled to accommodate the building pad area no more than 1 foot above the base elevation. Base elevation, as defined, is when used for the purposes of determining lot elevations for grading permits for 1 and 2 family dwellings. The base elevation is the elevation of the center line of this street opposite the front corner that provides the highest street elevation. All elevations shall be referenced to an assumed base elevation of 100 feet. I know that's a little wordy and a little confusing, but I'll try to explain it visually here. This should help. So here's the property, all as one piece. Fronts on Eagle Lane. Here's the assumed benchmark. Now this information is provided to us from a registered land surveyor. So this is a professional, accurate determination. The 100 elevation, or the benchmark, is in the center line of the street. Based on that elevation, he also gives us elevations at the setback corners, which is where we make that determination. So we average these 4 numbers. We have a 101 here, 98, 71.5, 74.5. The average of the setback corners, 86.25, which is below 100. And so therefore we grant the 101 as the max grade for the property. Now, building height, we go back to the table once again, the RE district. The building height, maximum building height for that zoning district is 30 feet. You can see there within the circle. That is established by code, the 30 feet. Here's the section of code that applies to the grade. Lots with the major portion of lot grade line below the base elevation may be filled to accommodate the building pad no more than 1 foot above base flood or base elevation. This is an image that is directly clipped from the code. This illustration is done to assist individuals in interpreting the code and determining what is appropriate on a lot. Measurement for buildings and structures, the maximum height of the building and structure not addressed in subsection C2 below shall be measured from the vertical distance from the approved max grade to an imaginary plane located the allowed number of feet above the parallel to the average of the lot grade, which in this case is the 30 feet. And so as shown on the illustration, you can see this image on the right where you have what I would call more of a typical home, showing the street frontage and the 30 feet in this case to an imaginary line to the peaks of those roofs. And then you also have an illustration here which indicates, which I would suggest is more applicable in this case, where you have the downward sloping lot. There is building that's a structure that's below the actual grade. Here's that grade imposed across, and that's where it indicates where we would measure that height from, 30 feet, once again to the peak. Here is the cross section that was also provided with the building permit. And I added some in here, expanded some of this information so it was more readable. This is the Eagle Lane side of the property. We have the existing home here you can see in crosshatch. This is the Palmer Drive side. We apply the 30-foot limit indicated by this dashed line. We have imposed that all the way across the entire property. We also take the base elevation, which is indicated by this red dashed line, impose it all the way across the property. It looks very similar to what you saw in the code section in the illustration. You can see here that that although the portions of the roof line vary throughout this home, none of them exceed the 30-foot elevation. Now I've kind of split this into two now so that we could blow this up and look at it a little more closely. We have the benchmark elevation in the center of the street once again at 126. Max grade, therefore 1 foot above that would be at 127 mean sea elevation. So the maximum elevation for this property then for building height would be at 157 indicated here. And you can see that the existing home is just a little bit shy of that 157. The portion that's attached is actually at 150.98. So about 7 feet below what could be allowed. Here you have a portion at 153, which is below the 157, and I'll continue on down to the other side. Once again, you have a portion of the roof structure at 154.5, roughly. Here you have it at 140, 135, and so on. All measured from that same elevation plane that runs across the entire property, the maximum elevation which runs across the entire property at 157. Whoop, sorry. Oh, let me go back, wrong way.
Stuart, could I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Would you go back to the first slide of the layout of the lot real quickly?
Cross section?
Keep going. That one right there.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thought maybe you had a question. All right, now, the board's limited jurisdiction. The board is authorized by state law and Development Code to, number one, hear and decide appeals of alleged errors in an order, requirement, or decision made by the zoning administrator in the enforcement of the zoning ordinance, or the Development Code in this case. Hear and decide requests for variances from the zoning ordinance, which is the Development Code. Items outside the board's jurisdiction are the timing of the lot combination application and approval, and a variance for building height because there was no request for a variance from the building height. Conclusions. The zoning administrator completed a zoning clearance as required by the city code. I just walked you through the entire process that was done. The zoning administrator calculated the maximum allowable height in accordance with the city code. And then the findings. In 2005, Lake Havasu City Council approved a subdivision code modification for 2015 Eagle Lane and 2010 Palmer Drive to modify a subdivision code requirement to allow the two lots to ultimately be combined. One condition of approval was that the property owner was to submit the necessary application and a fee to combine the lots. Neither the city nor the city code required when the lot alternation or lot alteration application and fee must be submitted. In 2020, the property owner submitted a building permit application for construction of an addition to the 2015 Eagle Lane residence. On January 14th, 2021, building permit 21-1352 was issued for a living and garage addition to 2015 Eagle Lane. On January 26th, the property owner submitted a lot alteration application to combine the lots on 2015 Eagle Lane and 2010 Palmer Drive, which was approved by the Development Services Department. The zoning elements of the building permit application were reviewed and approved by the zoning administrator through the building permit review process, which is the zoning clearance required by code section 140504A. The zoning administrator properly determined that the proposed development complied with the applicable standards and the provisions for the category of use and the applicable zoning district in full compliance with the development code. And that's the end of my findings.
Okay, we are at the table for questions of city staff and their presentation. Anybody? Mr. Gordon.
Chairman. Yeah, a couple of things. Thank you, everyone who's talked and presented. Mr. Schmeling, I guess a couple of things just to kind of summarize at least my understanding and how I feel about this. The kitchen thing obviously is a little bit arbitrary in our code. There's nothing in our code though that says you can't have two dining rooms or can't have, you know, multiple refrigerators or multiple serving areas. And obviously in a large home like this, it's pretty common to have a serving kitchen, a secondary, you know, area for, you know, a wet bar in different parts of the house, all kinds of things. So obviously anyone can look at a drawing that looks like a kitchen but doesn't have a range and say, well, that's going to be a kitchen someday. Well, sure, but maybe it's not also. Or someone could just throw a range into any room in the house someday, and we're not really here to debate. All we can look at is what's on the drawings, correct?
Right, and that is a building code provision as well.
Right.
So there's building codes that apply to kitchens, independent of zoning.
Okay, thank you. In terms of height, you know, there's I'm glad you showed that figure with the height measurement. I've never really seen or heard our code pointing to grade being determined as the actual dirt, or so to speak, that even if it says that the interpretation in this town has ever been that you can't have anything below that grade or below that dirt level. Height, in my opinion, per that figure you showed, has always been measured above that determined baseline elevation. Certainly, you know, there's plenty of homes all over this city, and particularly in this neighborhood on the golf course, where there is 30 feet up and there is multiple stories down, particularly along the golf course where you have 3 or 4 stories facing the golf course. So I don't see where that's ultimately an issue. If there was, to me, when I really look at this and think about it, this goes back to when the city council approved a lot combination. And certainly there's impact to the neighborhood when you take two decent sized properties and combine them as one. Now you've created a really large lot in the neighborhood. If that should have been addressed at that time, in my opinion, because at that time, by city council approving a lot combination, you've therefore approved a larger parcel in the neighborhood. You've therefore approved 50% of that larger parcel very clearly at that time could become a very large structure, and everything else changes with that lot combination. If there was an error made along the way, it was probably reviewing this prior to actually seeing that the lot combination was recorded and official. Ultimately, I'm assuming, and that's one of my questions today, that lot combination has been recorded. It's one parcel now, correct?
That is correct.
So, we can say that that wasn't the case at the time, but clearly that's the case now. And clearly there's a structure that was there that's been added onto. And at least when I look through these facts in terms of height and other things, it's a large home in the neighborhood. But when I, again, look back to that path was paved a long time ago when city council approved this combination and making it a really large parcel in the neighborhood. Is it too big for the neighborhood? We can debate that all day long, but ultimately that's not our decision to make at this point because it does meet the code as a larger parcel. So those are my comments and questions at this time.
Okay, I've got a couple. So, Mr. Smaling, what you're saying is the zoning clearance process is an internal process, doesn't require any kind of formal document, and it's something that is done on every type of application like this.
Well, not exactly. We have a formal process. It's called the design review process. It's not called the
Which
zoning
includes
clearance.
the zoning clearance process as we use it.
Correct. And we do on commercial and TIs and multifamily issue what we call a notice of action, which is essentially what the zoning clearance is. It is our review from the zoning perspective of the elements of all the design elements that apply to that particular application, and whether or not it's approved, denied, needs modification.
Well,
It's just that we choose not to do that formal application process as part of the building single family dwelling process, review process, because in our opinion, there's no need to have a separate application fee, a separate submittal, because we can do the limited amount of review that we need to do based on the submittal for the building set of plans. We can do that basically from 2 pages within a 30-page set of building plans.
It's a much more user-friendly process, and I commend you guys for that, because the more fees and the more applications become cumbersome in residential applications. So I can also attest to the fact that being a user of the system, I've had that zoning clearance, informal as it may, on every project ever done by me. The lot combination, my next question is, typically a lot combination like that runs with the land. Am I correct?
That is correct. There is
So-
no expiration date set on.
And there's no need to record that at any time, other than when it comes time to build upon that or develop that property, then that formal process of recording needs to happen for the city's verification.
Well, there are advantages to combining those lots and getting that information recorded, because then the assessor gives it one ID parcel, and therefore it's taxed as one parcel as opposed to 2 individual parcels. So there are some advantages to doing that, yes.
Okay, but not necessary.
Correct.
And it still runs with the land. It'll still run with the land even after a change of ownership.
Correct.
Okay. The last thing that I have, and I'm going to enlist your assistance, is just a point of clarification. If that lot on Palmer were a standalone lot, you've got a difference in height of probably about 21 feet or something like that as I looked at that topo. The average lot grade on that property, standalone, non-combined, would be about, based on your topo there, an 83.5 grade elevation. That's about 9.5 feet. Just take my word for it. I did the math, but it's about 9.5 feet above the street. So taking that given grade on that property at 9.5 plus 30, they could build basically a 40-foot structure there from grade. And I'm just kind of drawing that comparison to what we have here as the case. And that 40-foot structure could start at 20 feet from the street.
In anticipation of that question, I actually took that information and calculated it out.
Okay.
I had a copy of the original survey of the Palmer Drive property on its own, and applied the same concept as was indicated by the appellant, the average of the setback corners. Here's the new benchmark elevation on Palmer Drive, the 100, if you will. The 4 setback corners were at 101, 98, 121.7, and 123.10. You add those together, divide by 4, and you end up getting this 111.05. Now, on upward sloping lots, there's a second element to our code, which allows for lots of unique topography in order to minimize the impact on the owner from having to remove too much fill, whereby they can, if they can indicate a 7,000 square foot pad, they can change that base elevation based on the amount of fill on the property and showing the proper 2-to-1 slopes. In this case, they had a base elevation showing a 7,000 square foot pad at 120.25. And so if you take that and apply that to the drawings that we've seen already for the existing or proposed addition, here's the 120 elevation line, and I highlighted that with the green this time so we could so that we could see it, differentiating it from the red, which is off of the Eagle Lane right away. But you have the 120 benchmark. Here's the 30-foot maximum building height, which puts you at 150. So, and once again, I won't get into the specifics of the roof line, but it changes throughout. In this area here, it happens to be at 154.5. But nevertheless, I mean, here the height of that building would be at 34.6. So this portion of the building would be 4'6" above what would have been allowed if the Palmer Drive lot would have developed on its own.
So in theory, and I was a little low or conservative in my numbers, but in theory, based on the lot combination, the owner has only gained 4 feet to their structure in that particular location.
Well, in this case, you'd want to go by the maximum elevation.
Okay, he gained
would have
7
gained
feet.
7 feet, yes.
Okay, but the structure is actually only 4 feet above in that location.
Correct.
So there's really not too much of a difference between the two properties being combined as far as elevation abilities. That's all I was trying to point out.
Yeah, and I would add to that, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gordon.
Is the property line roughly the right side of your screen, Stuart?
The old property line,
Yeah.
it's probably a little further to the right, but I just cut that. I used the same image that I used in the previous.
So I mean, not only that, but if we're comparing what could have been versus what is, there's a very, very small portion of the structure that extends above that 4'6" encroachment. You know, everything to the left of that is well below what it could have been if it was a freestanding structure on this lot. Right?
Absolutely. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
The comparison I was trying to make. Okay. Any other questions of staff by commission members? Mr. Bergen.
The presentation by Mr. Cunningham named a lot of things that he wanted us to make a decision on. And there are two items that I have a question about. Regarding the timeliness of the lot combination in the staff report, claims regarding the timing of the lot combination are not board authority. Lot alteration applications are approved by the Development Services Director and appealable to P&Z. The board cannot hear or decide this as it lacks jurisdiction. The second item involved variance of building height. The heights proposed and ultimately approved were in conformance with the development code. The board has no jurisdiction on this claim. So it seems like, from what I'm reading in the staff report, there are two subjects here that we should not even be discussing.
That is correct. If there would have been a request for a height exception, which is part of the development code, you would have been involved. However, there was no height exception requested, therefore it's not a part of this particular case. The action that was taken by council in 2005 was an amendment to the subdivision code, which is not under the jurisdiction of the Board of Adjustment. Your jurisdiction lies within Title 14, which is the development code or the zoning code, not Title 13, which is the subdivision code.
Well, the height appeal was in the written appeal that we received. So,
There was a height issue requested or review requested, but there was no height variance given, so nothing to appeal, correct?
Yeah, I was hoping that to avoid that confusion. If an applicant or an appellant submitted an appeal of the zoning administrator's decision for a height variance or a requested height variance, then it would go to the board. But because that there is no variance being requested, it's just a question of whether or not I applied the code correctly in determining the height on this particular application.
Thank you. That was a good clarification. Any other questions of staff? Hearing none, this is a public hearing. I will now open the podium to the public. Is there anybody in the audience that wishes to speak on this item, either pro or con? Anybody at all? Please come to the podium and state your name for the record. Spell your last name, please.
Hi, good morning. My name's Philip Overcash, Overcash. I'm with the firm of Provident Law. I'm here on behalf of Eric and Gail Blodgett. I just want to thank the board for your time this morning and your consideration of these issues. I believe Mr. Schmeling and the planning division have really done a great job putting together this report and these recommendations, and we of course agree with those recommendations. I just wanted to point out a few things that have already been stated, some that haven't. Again, I'm here on behalf of my clients, Eric and Gail Blodgett. Eric's here. They've been residents here in Lake Havasu City since the 90s. This is their dream home. They've been planning it since, well, probably about 15 years, I believe. Along the way, Eric has done everything properly. He has, with the direction and assistance of city staff, he has made the appropriate requests, submitted the appropriate applications. He's crossed all the T's and dotted all the I's. In our view, the city also has done everything properly here. I just want to respond to a couple of points made by Mr. Cunningham and that have already been addressed here. First of all, this is a single-family home. The residents of this home will be Eric and Gail Blodgett, no one else. It's one home. It's attached. Lots were properly combined. City Council did that back in 2005. Again, the whole issue of the timing of actually putting that combination plan in front, and making that official, it's a red herring. That's form over substance, really. Again, Chairman Harris, you pointed out the zoning administrator did what the zoning administrator always does in these cases. The planning division properly issued the permit. The 4 factors that were to be considered, they've checked every box: setbacks, lot coverage, max grade, building height. Again, the fact that these 2 lots were properly combined resolves any questions here. So, and again, it's been pointed out, and I will not purport to give you legal advice, but obviously your jurisdiction is very limited here. And again, Mr. Bergen's correct. There are a lot of issues here that really shouldn't even be discussed, but we obviously agree with the recommendations of the planning division. There was no variance requested here. The height issue is not an issue. And we would agree with the planning division and ask this board to dismiss the appeal. Thank you.
Any questions of the speaker? Thank you, Mr. Overcash.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to speak on this item? Anybody at all? Come to the podium and state your name for the record.
Wayne Lambert.
Spell your last name.
Lambert. Thank you.
Good to see you, Wayne.
Good seeing you again, Jim. I'd like to thank the board for meeting today and staff coming up here. The only thing that I want to toss out there, I am the general contractor on this project. So I thought if anybody had any questions about how we got where we were going, I'd make myself available to answer those things. But on a couple of notes, you saw a lot of paperwork that staff presented regarding the height of the project and how we got where we were going. I want to be clear about that we had a survey, registered land surveyor, complete all these documents. We looked at the elevation from Palmer. We looked at the elevation from Eagle. We provided all that to staff early on in the project to be sure we wouldn't run afoul of any possible zoning issues. We didn't request a zoning variance. We wanted to be sure that what we were doing fell within standard building practices in Lake Havasu. So I think that's a really important element. The other thing that I want to point out is when we discuss the lot tie condition, nobody's actually brought it up that I've heard yet, but I want everybody to know that Mr. Blodgett was paying the county assessor's office had combined those lots, and he was only paying one tax bill for multiple years. His assumption was it got married together in the process there. It wasn't again until we met with staff and determined in the plan process of review that this hadn't been done. We worked with Luke, who's the assistant, to complete those documents and resubmit them to the city and finalize it. But there was one parcel number for both those lots, and I can't tell you how many years, but for quite a few years. That's the facts that I wanted to present. The other side that I want to point out is that the attorney that Mr. Cunningham that represented himself, to me, the opening statement that he said was, we're not here to argue facts. We're here to create a cloud of dust, in my opinion. All the things that they brought up about the zoning code and the administration of that, are their opinions of things. The facts are the facts. Everything was done properly. There was nothing done that shouldn't have been done. And everything that was looked at as far as setbacks, everything was completed. The plans were ran through the building division for their review of all the building. And as we all know, living in Lake Havasu for years, there's all sorts of different homes and built on different lots. Some are up, some are down, some are flat. Everybody takes advantage of their lot for their individual use. That's the beauty of Lake Havasu City. You know, if we're all familiar, and Mr. Cunningham said that about building a big wall. We're all familiar with making that big bend on Jamaica there, and that guy that built that wall is probably 25, 30 feet tall, one continuous wall. So if you want to do something and you want to put enough money into it, you can do what you want to do. And that is within his code to build that wall. So everything that the Blodgetts are doing has been reviewed. I can't tell you how many times because of the concerns of what was going to go on there with the height of it. But it's all been done properly and it is complete. And I just take a little bit of offense to somebody coming to our community and telling us how we should be operating and building our stuff based on no facts and how we should interpret our codes. I think staff did a great job. They presented it properly, and I think the board is has a lot of information and should be able to make a correct decision. I would thank you.
So what you said in the beginning of your statement, by virtue of the fact that the city caught the fact that it wasn't combined and recorded as such, the zoning clearance worked.
Yep, it did.
Thank you.
Thank
Any
you.
other questions of the speaker? Thank you, Mr. Lambert.
Thank you.
Anybody else in the audience that wishes to speak on this item? Anybody at all? Hearing none, I'll go ahead and close the public hearing portion of the meeting and bring it back to city staff for rebuttal, appellant rebuttal, and then city staff recommendation. Mr. Schmaley?
Hold on, I'm getting to the right slide. Okay, our recommendation is that based on the findings, that we recommend that land use action 21-016-00001, the appeal of the zoning administrator's decision related to the approval and issuance of building permit number 21-1352 be dismissed.
Okay, the appellant, would you like an opportunity to rebut? State your name again for the record.
My name is Whitney Cunningham.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity. Listening to the questions and comments, it doesn't sound like I've made very many converts here this morning, but on behalf of my clients who are decades-long members of this community and their surrounding neighbors who rely on the fair and even-handed enforcement of the zoning code, I appreciate the opportunity to have been heard. And I will simply say this. Mr. Schmeling, our zoning officer, said to you during his presentation, and I quote, normally they issue a notice of action in commercial and retail and multifamily projects. But he said, quote, we choose not to do that formal process for single family residences because in our opinion, there is no need for that process. Okay, he told you that. He told you it didn't occur. And if it did occur, he got it wrong. We would ask for that recognition and simply ask that this case be returned to the development office where it can be properly processed, hopefully not brought back to you. And in this way, avoid a development that is outside the confines of your code. But with that, I'm going to end my comments. And once again, I thank you for your time.
Thank you, sir. Okay, we are at the table for discussion and or a motion. Board members? Anybody?
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Gordon.
Thank you again to everyone for everything that was said and for staff for presenting it as clean and concise as you did with all the information. I mean, my feeling after studying this and looking at it today is that, you know, staff did do a good job of being fair and consistent with the zoning code that is in place and how the city has interpreted that code over the last 10, 15, 20 years. I feel like if it was brought back to staff, we would, the same decisions, the same thought process, the same methodology would be applied again today. At the end of the day, like I said earlier, if there was a concern of this being built this large, this high, those sort of things, it should have been discussed at the time the lot was allowed to be combined into basically a double-sized property in the middle of a neighborhood. Whether it was or not at that time, I don't know, but at the end of the day, that's what paved the way to be here today for a structure this large. Structures in Havasu all over are getting bigger and bigger, and everyone's looking to maximize what they can build on their properties. I feel like the decisions that were made, like I mentioned earlier, are consistent and in line with the code. And so that all being said, I understand the concerns on both sides, but I would like to make a motion if I can.
Go ahead. Floor is yours.
I move to dismiss land action 21-016-000001, appeal of the zoning administrator's decisions related to the approval and issuance of building permit number 21-1352, affirming the decisions made by the zoning administrator.
We have a motion made by Mr. Gordon and a second by Ms. Bruck to dismiss item number 21-016-00001. Any further discussion on the item? Mr. Bergen.
On this, if I were a next door neighbor, I wouldn't be too happy with this. However, the decisions made by the zoning administrator are all correct and applicable. Perhaps some of the wording or the timelines perhaps could have been made a little better, but I therefore agree with the motion that has been made. I think that the job has been done by the zoning administrator.
Any other comments? I'll go ahead and make one. As a user of the system, I find that what they've done is consistent with everything they've applied to me in the past. So I think they took the care and considered all the ramifications and followed the letter of the code. So any additional discussion? Let's call for the question.
Mr. Bergen?
Yes.
Ms. Brock? Donna Brock?
Yes.
Michael Gordon?
Yes.
Robin Hill?
Yes.
Jim Harris?
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
Okay, that concludes our formal business here today. I will entertain a call to the public. That is where the public can come and speak on any issue they wish. We may not address it, but they can come and address the board. Anybody? I will close the call to the public. And I believe we have no future meetings at this time.
At this point, we do not have any meetings scheduled, but we will want to schedule a meeting in order to approve these minutes once they're done.
Fine. All right. Thank you, board members. We stand adjourned.